Okay, so again, good evening. Welcome to the second session of Mastering the Mind, this set of teachings on the Bodhisattva by Master Shantideva. So as usual, we'll begin with the recitations before the teachings. That begins on page 1 of your prayers with the homage to Shakyamuni Buddha, which we'll do 3 times. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And let's do the short mandala offering that is also on page 1 of the prayers. Again, trying to make in your own mind this visualized offering of the entire phenomenal world transformed into a beautiful Buddha paradise, which is kind of our own future pure realm, as well as the pure realm that all beings can eventually experience. And we're making this vast offering to receive these teachings. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then on page 2, we'll do the refuge and bodhichitta before the teaching. Tonight, we'll do this once in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyan gipe sonam gi drola penshir sangye drupar shog. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chanyan Gipe Sonam Gi Drola Penchir Sangye Drupar Shog. Okay, you can set the prayers aside. We're not going to do the Heart Sutra tonight. We did that last week, and maybe we'll do that at the very end of the course, but otherwise we'll just do those prayers before each of these teachings. So find a nice meditation posture, one that works for you. We'll do a short meditation before we begin. Give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit, to let go of any distractions we might have from the day. And then on the basis of a calmer mind, we'll generate a most positive motivation for being here, this motivation of bodhicitta. And so again, just begin the meditation on the breath, focusing in whatever way suits your mind. And we'll do that in silence for just a few minutes, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection to set motivation. So now with our minds a bit more focused, let's generate the motivation of bodhicitta, which as we saw was the main topic of the first part of this text that we studied some time ago. But also in this fourth chapter, we're learning about the need to have that conscientiousness, that carefulness in regard to the cultivation of this mind, to make sure that we continue to increase it, develop it, and try not to let it decline in the least. So this is another opportunity to do that, to work on developing this mind to a greater degree. And let's do this tonight by thinking about visualizing all sentient beings surrounding us. Of course, we no doubt don't have the imagination to think of all sentient beings, but we can visualize certainly those beings who we're very close to in the space to either side and immediately behind us, our friends and family members of this life. And the space in front of us, those difficult people, the challenging people in our life that do cause us to sometimes lose that mind of compassion and love towards others. And then surrounding those beings that we have a defined relationship with are the beings that we don't know, the strangers, the countless beings in this life, in this world, as well as all realms of existence that aren't in our lives at this moment to a greater degree. And just recognize that however we're visualizing these beings, that every single sentient being has that same fundamental desire, a desire to find happiness, a desire to be free from suffering. We're alike in that way. We ourselves the same as every one of those beings. Every one of those beings the same as each other. And no doubt, most of us have simply not yet found the path that leads to happiness, the way to be free from suffering completely. But we ourselves have met with this Mahayana path that leads not only to the end of your own suffering, the attainment of your own peace and liberation, but moreover leads to the result of Buddhahood, a state of complete enlightenment in which we will then be fully qualified to help all other beings. So looking upon these sentient beings that we're visualizing around us with the eyes of love and compassion, that truly wants them to be happy and wants to become the cause of their happiness, that wants them to be free from suffering and wants to become the cause of that result. We hold all of them in our hearts, and we generate that wish to become a Buddha for their sake. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, with the mind of bodhicitta, we're not just guaranteed the eventual result of enlightenment, but we have all the happiness all the way to enlightenment. The happiness of this life, the happiness of future lives, the happiness of liberation, and the happiness of complete enlightenment and the ability to bring all sentient beings to that same state. So cultivate that very altruistic motivation for being here, thinking that you're going to engage in these teachings to help you to advance on this path. And you're here to create the causes for that eventual result of your own enlightenment and the enlightenment of all beings. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully and we'll begin. So in last week's class, we went through initially just a little talk about the basic program. For those of you who might be new to the basic program, I won't review any of that. The videotapes of that is available, so you can look at that if you are curious about the basic program. The second thing that we went through was a brief review of what we've already talked about in the first 3 chapters that I taught in New York last year. Some of you were at those teachings, but they also are available on video. And if you need the links to that, again, talk to the person that's your coordinator for Namdroling or for Shantideva Center, and they will be sure to get that to you. But they're out on YouTube right now from that weekend. So again, in that first course, we looked at the cultivation of bodhicitta, what bodhicitta is all about, and went through the process of developing bodhicitta more deeply through taking the commitment of the bodhisattva vows. Of course, we didn't take it as part of the course, but to look at what Master Shantideva advises in regard to that. And in this 4th chapter and all the chapters remaining, we're really looking at the behavior that is upheld by bodhicitta. Recall that there are those two types of bodhicitta: bodhicitta of aspiration, the wishing bodhicitta, that is the desire to go to enlightenment that we just cultivated. But then there's also the engaging bodhicitta, where we actually set out on the path and we do all the actions that are in line with achieving that result. So with chapter 4, which is called the Teachings on Conscientiousness, we're looking initially, and we're almost done with that section, of looking at how we are conscientious around bodhicitta and our cultivation of that mind, so that we don't let it wane in any way, that we continue to strengthen it and develop it, seeing that it is a very serious promise that we're making, a commitment, a vow to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. It's something that we do have to take seriously and engage in the actions that are appropriate on the basis of that. Then we'll be going into a second section where we look at the conscientiousness that's required around the trainings of the Bodhisattva. And we'll look at those in terms of 3 different areas, but we'll get to that later tonight. So last week we did make it up through verse 7 of chapter 4. And again, the format for tonight's class will be very similar. What I'd like to do is maybe over the next hour or so till about 8:45 East Coast time. Whoops, is that right? No, 7:45 East Coast time. No, it's got to be 8:45. Uh, yeah. Anyway, at 8:45 East Coast time, around then we'll stop and we'll have a little break just to see if there are any questions, and then we'll conclude the class at 9 o'clock. If there are no questions, then I'll continue teaching. But essentially, I'm going to go straight through, and if you do have any questions that arise in the middle of the teachings, you do have a chat box at the bottom of your screen that you can click on, and you can put the question there, and then I'll be sure to get to it when we do have the break for questions. So again, let me go to the PowerPoint slides, which I've been doing in order to kind of have a structure around these teachings. I'm hoping that people will be able to see all of the slides. I noticed that there was, some problem with this little box that shows up there sometimes. I think I've got it out of the way on my side so that everything shows up clearly, but if not, I'm not really sure exactly how to have the box thing showing up there. Chapter 4 is divided into 3 main parts. The short explanation was the very first verse of chapter 4. And might go ahead and I'll just read that verse right now. Having firmly upheld the mind of enlightenment in this way, a victor's child should always make effort to not transgress the trainings without ever wavering. So in a sense, that's really the essence of this chapter, is Master Shantideva telling us that we should, if we've really looked into this mind of bodhicitta and we understand what it is and we make the commitment to practice this way, we want to be sure to not waver from that. We're in the extensive explanation that began with chapter 2 and is the bulk of the chapter. It goes all the way through verse 47, and then there will be a summary verse at the very end. As I mentioned, this is divided into 2 parts: meditating on conscientiousness for bodhicitta, which is verses 2 through 11. And again, we've made it up through verse 7, so we'll continue with that. And then the second part that we'll get into tonight, being conscientious in the trainings of the Bodhisattva. So the faults of giving it up follows from the meditating on conscientiousness for bodhicitta. We were in that section looking at the fault of going to the lower realms. That if we have made this strong commitment to others to uphold the bodhisattva path and we haven't done it, well then we've deceived those beings. And we will have first the fault of going to the lower realms, of having to experience the rebirths that would result from the karma of that. The second section that we're going to look at right now is that we will also degenerate from the welfare of others. We won't be able to accomplish the welfare of others as long as our bodhisattva trainings have fallen off, as long as our bodhicitta is no longer that active. And then finally, the third topic, that we will become far from attaining a ground. And I'll talk about that when we get to that section. So on your handout as well, I think all of you have the handouts, the readings, in a sense, very short readings that are for this course. On the very first page of that, there were 3 summary verses or commentary sections from another commentary that I've used in the past when I've taught on this, Drukpa Gyaltsen's Precious Garland. He gives the drawbacks for each of these, the 3 that we're looking at: the drawback of going to the bad migrations, which again was on that previous slide, the drawback of degenerating from others' welfare, which is what we're looking at now, and then finally the drawback of delaying the attainment of the bodhisattva grounds. So this is what he says in regard to that second fault. This degeneration of the mind of enlightenment for a bodhisattva is the heaviest of the root downfalls. If such a downfall were to occur, the welfare of all sentient beings would be weakened due to the degeneration of the thought of others' welfare, because the support of the deeds has degenerated. So what he's talking about here in regard to this, many of you have taken the Bodhisattva vows. There are 18 root downfalls, and there are 46 secondary transgressions that one can engage in if you're not careful, if you don't have this heedfulness, this conscientiousness around holding those vows. Among the 18, there is the 18th, which is to give up bodhicitta, to let that mind, degenerate. And it's not one that we have that we should take it very, very seriously. And it's not one that we have to have these other factors present. We don't have to be kind of aware of um, to not see it as detrimental, to not regard it as something that we wouldn't do again. These various four factors that we've talked about in the earlier course, they don't need to be present in order for us to give up our bodhicitta. Just a simple thought of kind of saying, oh, I can't possibly do this anymore. I'm done with the bodhisattva path. That type of thinking. Recall last week we looked at that one example of Shariputra. Shariputra, who had taken the bodhisattva commitment, and then on the basis of this interaction with a sort of ogre that was a Mara appearing to him, who asked for his hand, and he ended up cutting off his right hand and handing it to him with his left. And of course, the left hand in India is not a proper hand to be using to, hand food to someone else. And so the ogre was upset at this act. Even though he was being offered what he had asked for, he got very upset, and Shariputra lost his bodhicitta. He said, with beings like you in the world, I can't possibly attain the state of enlightenment. So we want to be careful not to give up that mind. So the 18th root bodhisattva downfall doesn't require these additional factors. It's just that thought. If we hold that thought, by virtue of that, we will have lost our vows, because we won't have the basis for those vows. Bodhicitta is what those vows are rooted in. Again, it's engaging bodhicitta as opposed to the aspiring bodhicitta, that is that wish. If we lose that simple wish, that aspiration to become enlightened for the sake of others, then we do have serious repercussions. And so that's what we're looking at in regard to these particular verses. So that was, again, Master Darpa Gyaltsen's commentary on this. Let's go forward then to the next slide, where we get into verse 8. So verse 8 says, this, for a bodhisattva, is the heaviest of downfalls. If it were to occur, the welfare of all sentient beings would be weakened. This is essentially giving us the reasoning as to why this is such a serious downfall, is because you have taken all beings as the basis of this, and you're wanting to benefit all beings. So because the scope of it is so vast, it's the wish for all sentient beings to attain enlightenment, and enlightenment itself is the greatest possible result that we wish for all beings. We've lost the basis for our bodhicitta and our bodhisattva deeds, bodhisattva vows. By virtue of that, we've committed a very heavy downfall. In the commentary that we have, which again, I think all of you also have, it's the commentary from Gyaltsab. He quotes from the Superior Compendium. I'm not sure what that text is, probably again a sutra of sorts. It says, although one has practiced the path and the 10 grounds for 10 million eons, if one generates the wish to be a self-liberator arhat, at that moment morality has received a fault and degenerated. This mind generation is much heavier than a root downfall. So again, the idea here, and this is on page 5 of Gyaltsab's commentary on chapter 4, is that the tendency sometimes, and what we have to guard ourselves against in particular, is degenerating to the inferior motivation. You'll recall that there are the two main paths that the Buddha taught: the Hinayana, which is the path of individual liberation, and the Mahayana, which is the path of kind of universal concern, universal vehicle, the universal welfare. And so as those aspiring on the Mahayana path, we're committing to universal concern, that we are concerned for the welfare of all beings. If through the power of our deluded minds, we degenerate to the Hinayana motivation, as it says there, we generate the wish to become a self-liberated arhat, to really just achieve our own liberation, then we've left behind all of those beings. So we have to be very careful, not just to let our bodhicitta, completely disappear, which would be, really horrible, but to not let it also subvert to that lower level of motivation, where we're only concerned about our own liberation and not about the welfare of other beings. So again, we can lose our bodhicitta. It's actually said in the traditional teachings that there's only a portion of the bodhisattva path where we can lose our bodhicitta. Recall that I mentioned this in the previous course. When you enter into the Mahayana path, the very first moment of the Mahayana path is generated when you have this mind of bodhicitta in what we call a spontaneous or uncontrived way. You have it so that it will not, it's very stable. It doesn't require you to have the whole thought process of the techniques for generating bodhicitta for it to arise. It arises quite naturally. So it's really quite strong already at that point, but there is like a small portion of the path right at the beginning where that bodhicitta could potentially degenerate. And it could, of course, degenerate before entering the path. Those of us who don't have that strength of mind yet to have spontaneous bodhicitta would probably have more likelihood that we could develop that lower level motivation of self-liberation and so on. But essentially, there are the 5 paths of the bodhisattvas, the path of accumulation, preparation, seeing, meditation, and the path of no more learning, which is Buddhahood. On the very first path, the path of accumulation, it's divided into 3 parts: the small, the middle, and the great path of accumulation. And it's actually said that while you are on the small path of accumulation, your bodhicitta can still degenerate. Even though you've made it spontaneous, you can still have some degeneration of that. So the bodhisattva has to be careful even after entering the bodhisattva path to make sure that their bodhicitta doesn't decline in any way. And once they get to the second level of the path of accumulation, it's at that point that the bodhicitta is firm. It will not degenerate, and it will continue to develop and grow throughout the path. So it's only a small part of the bodhisattva path where this could potentially happen, where someone could have that weakening of their bodhicitta and the development of the lower level motivation, seeking one's own liberation. But nonetheless, again, we're being given instructions here because most of us aren't even at that level. So our bodhicitta can decline pretty easily. If we become discouraged at we read all these teachings, or we even study this text and we see what's all entailed in practicing the 6 perfections and so on, we might get somewhat discouraged. So it's important to recognize, Pema Chodron in her commentary on these chapters, she says, we're going to have times where we feel discouraged. It's without a doubt that we will not always feel the same level of enthusiasm for the bodhisattva path. But a moment of discouragement isn't what we're talking about here. We're talking about the relinquishing of that, letting go of that mind of bodhicitta, no longer believing that that is something that we have to uphold or that we want to uphold. Let's go back to the slides again then, and we'll look at the next verse. This will be verse 9. So again, on the commentary, we're on page 6. Verse 9 says, "Should others, for even a single instant, hinder or obstruct his or her merit by weakening the welfare of sentient beings, there will be no end to their unfortunate rebirths." So it's kind of interesting. They throw these 2 verses, 9 and 10, in here that seem to be diverting the message a little bit. Initially in verse 8, we were talking about our own relinquishing of bodhicitta and how that would be so serious because we have all beings as the object of that. In verse 9, it's saying, should anyone for an instant hinder or obstruct the merit of a bodhisattva, the actions of a bodhisattva, by weakening the welfare of sentient beings, by virtue of that, there will be no end to their unfortunate rebirths. Of course, that's kind of a bit of hyperbole, because eventually there has to be some end to that. The karma will exhaust itself. But nonetheless, this is a pretty serious mistake as well. Now, why it's presented in this section, I think it's just really the fact that if we see that this is true for others, if there's someone else who is a bodhisattva and we obstruct their actions, somehow we keep them from doing what they need to do in order to awaken others, in order to proceed on their path, well then, because their mind is intent upon benefiting all beings, it's as if we've gone against the welfare of all sentient beings by obstructing that bodhisattva's behavior. So if that's true for other bodhisattvas, well, that's certainly true for ourselves. In a sense, if we obstruct our own development of liberation, well, then we're also in the same category. We are getting in the way of our ability to enact the welfare of others. And so this is just admonishing that it's even true, of course, for other beings. If there's a bodhisattva, say one of our teachers or gurus or what have you, and somehow our behavior obstructs them, keeps them from doing what they need to do, well, this is a very serious deed. There's a few other quotes that are in Gyaltsep J there. I don't know that I need to go through all of these. Again, it's just pointing out how in Sutra these various things were set out to delineate the disadvantages of getting in the way of a bodhisattva's behavior that would benefit others. So in terms of verse 10, let's go on then to that. Verse 10 says, "If I shall degenerate by destroying the happiness of even one sentient being, then what need is there to mention destroying the happiness of all embodied beings, vast as space without exception?" So this is kind of giving the reason for why it's so serious to get in the way of a bodhisattva's deeds. It says, if I'm going to degenerate by destroying the happiness of even one sentient being, if I get in the way of the happiness of one sentient being by stealing from them, by lying to them, by taking their life or wounding them, well then, there are great repercussions from that. We know from our teachings on karma. Rebirths that we take in the unfortunate realms, all the other sufferings that we experience on the basis of that behavior. So Master Shantideva is saying then in the last two lines, then what need is there to mention destroying the happiness of all embodied beings? If we get in the way of the happiness of all beings by obstructing that bodhisattva, well then it's guaranteed that we're going to have negative repercussions from that. So again, this is not something that needs a whole lot of explanation. Gyaltsep J says, why the above mentioned actions are of infinite negativity is, if one destroys the happiness of abiding with life of just one sentient being, one degenerates from one's high status, we lose our higher rebirth and fall to a lower one. So what need is there to mention that one will be reborn in the lower realms if one destroys the cause for the highest happiness of all sentient beings equaling space? So we do have to have that awareness of why it's so important that we don't degenerate our bodhicitta, but also that we don't get in the way of others. So the third fault, so we looked at the fault of going to the lower realms last week. We're looking now and just finished the fault that we degenerate from the welfare of others, that others are not benefited while we are obstructing that mind in ourselves or diminishing that mind in ourselves. The third one is that you become far from attaining a ground. So let me go through the verse first, and then I'll go through a little bit of what we mean by a ground. First, we go back to the handout again, the readings, the third section that we're looking at here, the drawback of delaying the attainment of the bodhisattva grounds. This is what Abbot Drakpa Gyaltsen says on that. This is also again on your handout on that first page. Thus, if those who have the force of a downfall, as explained above, and have the force of the mind of enlightenment once again, were to stay revolving within cyclic existence, they would have to be reborn in the unfortunate rebirths, through the force of karma and afflictions, whereby for a long time they would be hindered from attaining the grounds, such as very joyous, the first of the 10 grounds. So this is talking about the fact that if we degenerate our bodhicitta, and if we kind of have that mind diminish, but then we renew that and strengthen that again, but perhaps have this kind of vacillating back and forth between those. And it's true, we can renew our bodhisattva vows even if they've been degenerated and what have you, or even replenish our bodhicitta commitment if we have weakened it. But the idea is to try to stay as much as possible on a path that is not degenerating. Because if we keep going back and forth between these two, even though we might end up with the mind of bodhicitta, we might have some blocks to our ability to progress on the path. So it talked about in particular what are called the grounds. You might have heard the Sanskrit word for this, which is bhumi. The bhumis, or the grounds, are what the bodhisattva, I was mentioning the 5 paths earlier, starting with the path of seeing. Let me go through actually, the path of accumulation was what we were talking about, the initial level of the bodhisattva, where you could still have some degeneration of bodhicitta. But you enter into the path of preparation by virtue of having a mind that is a union of calm abiding, this very stable meditative state, together with the special insight, the investigation into the mind of emptiness, the wisdom of emptiness. And when you have that, and still in a very conceptual way, you enter into the path of preparation. The path of preparation is called that because it prepares you for your initial direct realization of emptiness that is non-conceptual. So you keep strengthening that mind of the wisdom realizing emptiness. You also are strengthening your bodhichitta and the bodhisattva deeds, accumulating more merit until you get to the end of the path of preparation and you enter into what's called the path of seeing. The path of seeing is always entered into on the basis of a meditative stabilization, what we call a meditative equipoise on emptiness. The bodhisattva enters into that mental state and realizes emptiness in a non-conceptual way. And this is the beginning of what are called the 10 grounds. That's the first ground that was referred to in that commentary from Abbot Drukpa Gyaltsen as the very joyous. It's the first realization of emptiness by that bodhisattva who is definite in the Mahayana. It is their initial removal of some level of the obscurations that are keeping us from being a Buddha. And when they come out of that meditative stabilization, they are liberated from that level of obscuration. They no longer will have to experience that level again. Then when they enter into their next meditative equipoise on emptiness, it propels them into the path of meditation. The path of meditation or familiarization is where the bodhisattva continues on the 2nd through the 10th grounds. The 2nd through the 10th grounds are an increasing strength of wisdom together with an increase in merit to be able to eventually remove all the remaining obscurations in the mind and finally enter into the path of no more learning. The path of no more learning being the point where all the obscurations are removed and the bodhisattva becomes a Buddha. So what this is saying is that if you do have this vacillation in your bodhicitta, if you are constantly it gets strong, but then it weakens and you degenerate from it and then you renew it and you go back and forth, you may be hindered in terms of developing the first ground and all of the grounds that follow subsequently, because you won't have the sort of strength of mind that will help you to accumulate the merit that allows you to achieve that realization. This is where, once again, recall, and Venerable Rabina does this frequently, talks about the 2 wings of a bird, how we need these 2 factors to get to enlightenment, just like a bird needs 2 wings to fly. It's, the reality that we have to have the wisdom. The wisdom aspect is without a doubt necessary. That wisdom that realizes emptiness on the path of seeing is essential, as well as even prior to that to get you to the path of preparation. But it certainly is what keeps you removing layer after layer of obscuration. But you can't do that without the other wing, the wing of method, compassion, the wing that allows you to have the gas in the tank, in a sense, to be able to do that work. And so the wisdom is important and a very key factor, but without the merit, the method, we won't be able to achieve that result. So these 2 have to be kind of done in tandem. They say that you accumulate one great countless eon of merit on the first 2 paths, accumulation and preparation. You achieve another great countless eon of merit from the path of seeing through the end of the 7th ground, and then you'll be on the pure grounds, the 8th, 9th, and 10th grounds. You need one more accumulation of one great countless eon of merit to fulfill the merit needed for the pure grounds, and then you will finally become a Buddha. But you need both. You can't become enlightened without both. So what we are saying here again is another caution that we have to have is to not let our bodhicitta degenerate, because we could weaken our ability to achieve those realizations, and thereby to be a benefit to others, because these realizations are really key to our development of our minds and being able to achieve the results of Buddhahood. So let's look at verse 11. It says, "Thus, if those who have the force of a downfall and the force of the mind of enlightenment were to stay revolving within psychic existence for a long time, they would be hindered from attaining the ground." So this is speaking again, those first lines. If you have the force of a downfall, you lose your bodhicitta, and then the force of the mind of enlightenment returning again, and you could even repeat this a number of times. If you were to stay revolving within psychic existence, which is where we're all going to end up being if we don't get liberated and enlightened, for a long time they would be hindered from attaining the grounds. We're going to have some obstacles to achieving those realizations if we do let our bodhicitta waver in that way. So this is, again, just another admonishment from the text to help us to recognize the fault that will occur, this final of the 3 faults, that we will have some deterioration of our ability to accomplish the path. So that was everything that is involved in the very first section in regard to meditating on conscientiousness of bodhicitta, or desire to uphold that mind. Now we're moving into the next section, which is from verse 12 all the way to the end, nearly at verse 47, before we have that final summary verse. This is called simply being conscientious in the trainings of the Bodhisattva, the things that we are to engage in. Of course, the trainings could be described as the six perfections, but here we're looking more specifically at the trainings that are helping us to continue to have the good results that we need in order to progress on the path. So we're going to be looking at them in terms of three different areas. We'll start with the very first, conscientiously abandoning faults, abandoning faulty behavior. And then secondly, conscientiously meditating on virtue. This is an important part of it. Remember the wonderful verse that is part of some of the beginning prayers in the FPMT. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. Well, we kind of have all three of those here. We have abandoning the faults. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Commit only perfect virtuous actions. That's the second one. And then finally, subdue the mind. Abandon the afflictions. The afflictions are causing us to suffer, but they're moreover keeping us from being able to help others. So the afflictions may be the primary goal to be removed by those on the individual path, the Hinayana path, but nonetheless, bodhisattvas as well have to be very conscientious in abandoning the afflictions. This has 5 outlines. I'm not going to list all 5 on one slide because they just get too long. So know that you're going to be going through 5 different outlines in regard to the very first, conscientiously abandoning faults. The first outline, this is again from Gyaltsabje's text, the commentary that you have. If one does not abandon negativity and downfalls, one will stay in the lower realms. And as I mentioned last week, we're going to get still a lot more of this stick. There's the stick and the carrot, right? And we got a lot of the carrot stuff in the first few chapters, talking about all the marvels of bodhicitta. Here we're getting a bit of the stick in terms of not just bodhicitta that we looked at previously, but also even our behavior, making sure that we understand that there are consequences to our downfalls and to negative acts that we engage in. So verse 12 of chapter 4 pertains to that. Verse 12 says, therefore, just as I have promised, I shall respectfully accomplish it. If from now on I do not strive, I shall descend from lower to lower states. So this is the idea that, again, if we aren't careful with our behavior, if we aren't engaging in proper curtailing of our negative behavior, we will have consequences to that. Gyaltsabje says, therefore I should practice respectfully the trainings to attain enlightenment for the welfare of sentient beings according to my promise. If, after having generated bodhicitta and taken the vows, I do not make an effort, I will continuously go from lower realm to lower realm due to heavy downfalls. So whether we're talking about downfalls of the bodhisattva vow, whether they be one of the 46 transgressions or the root downfalls, or whether we're simply talking about unskillful behavior in general, we are going to face consequences of that. And if we end up doing that, we're going to have lower realm rebirth after lower realm rebirth. And I know that many of us have a difficult time getting our heads around some of these concepts of these realms of existence. But we can also see, mirrored in the human existence, many of these similar types of realm, hellish states, hungry ghost type states, animal states, of course, in this world. So we can see that there are beings who are experiencing some sort of karmic consequences of their past behavior. Well, because of everything we already discussed in terms of bodhicitta, this is, a serious consequence we'll have to pay if we don't abandon the faults, if we don't abandon the downfalls, because bodhicitta is a mind that is intent on the welfare of all beings. So let's go back to the verses again, to the next section, the second section in this. The second outline says, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas practice equanimity. This might require a little bit of explanation, because what we're going to see in the verses is that these various objections are being raised. People may think, well, so if I have faults, if I have downfalls and I engage in those, I'll get more chances. There'll be somebody there to rescue me. This type of thinking starts happening. We, again, don't take things perhaps as seriously as we'd like. Nonetheless, some of these uh, objections or proponents that are set out are, really not necessarily what we might think, but they're to give us the information that we need so that we don't degenerate from that behavior. So verse 13 is the one that first looks at this. It says, although countless Buddhas have passed by to benefit all sentient beings, yet I was not an object of their care because of my own misdeeds. So in this case, Gyaltsep says that one may think, I shall be all right, because the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas will rescue me. This might be one person's thinking, right? Well, I'm making this commitment to bodhicitta, but if it declines, it's no problem because the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are there to rescue me. They're there with that full dedication. Again, even in the outline heading, we said that Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have this equanimity. Well, that means that, again, they are, without a doubt, from their side, equally engaging in the welfare of all beings. They certainly won't give up on us. So with that idea of their equanimity, we may mistakenly think that that means that they're going to be there to support us. They're going to be there to help us if our bodhicitta degenerates. And so Gyaltsep continues, this is on page 9 of his commentary. He says, innumerable Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who have worked for the benefit of all sentient beings have passed already. But due to one's own fault of degenerating bodhicitta in the trainings, one did not become the object of their cure. So the idea behind this is that, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have existed for all time. There's beginningless time. There have always been these beings in the world that have been instrumental in helping others to practice a path of virtue and so on. But we we couldn't have possibly been benefited by them to the degree we would have liked, because we would already be enlightened by now if so. So these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have passed by. They've worked, they've lived in this world, appeared in this world, but due to our own fault of degenerating bodhicitta and having, the trainings degenerate, we didn't become the object of their cure. We didn't actually achieve the realizations that they wanted for us. This gets into that whole idea that, again, although there is this force in the world, without a doubt, Buddhas are enlightened beings who are dedicated to the welfare of all. And that's their sole job, their sole mission is to enlighten all beings. So they say Buddhas appear in any way that is useful for us. They can appear as non-material things, material things, whatever, anything in the world that would be useful. They certainly have, in this Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we certainly see our gurus as being manifestations of Buddhas, but that's not the only way that Buddhas appear. If we have the karma for Buddhas to appear in a certain way for us, then they will appear in that way. That's from their side, this compassionate wish to benefit beings temporally and ultimately. So everything is karmically determined from our side. The sentient beings, depending upon their karma, they will be benefited by Buddhas. But if we don't have the karma to be benefited, then we won't be. And it's not because there's something lacking on the Buddhist side, it's because there's something lacking on our side. So there's a little quote at the bottom of Gyaltsep commentary on page 9 that started, but it wasn't completed. It's from The Ornament of Clear Realization, which actually is a text that we study in the master's program at the very beginning. And it's also, chapter 4 of it is part of the basic program, which this course is part of as well. And all they have in the translation that you have in front of you is the first line. But this is another translation of it from the teachings that my teacher Geshe Gyatso did in Italy. He says, just as an impotent seed does not grow, even though the king of gods send down rain, those without fortune do not experience the excellent, even though the Buddhas arise. So just like a seed that doesn't have any potency to it, it's been damaged, it's been burnt or something so that it doesn't have that potency any longer. No matter how much rain is sent down, it never, you know, germinates and becomes a plant. It never fulfills its destiny because it is damaged in that way. In the same way, if we are blocked from our side, we don't have the fortune to experience the Buddhas in that way. We will continue to not have them giving us an opportunity to experience the excellences of the path and so on. Even though the Buddhas continually arise and are intent upon doing this for us, we won't benefit if we haven't created the karma from our side. So this is the idea behind that little verse that was shared in part by Gyaltsab Je in this section about, again, how the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have this equanimity, but we ourselves have to create the causes to experience the good fortune of their deeds and so on. So the second verse in this section is verse 14. And this says, if I still act like this, meaning, continuing to do all these downfalls and misdeeds, again and again, I will likewise experience bad migration, sickness, bondage, mutilation, and laceration. Of course, he's talking about all these various results in particular that do accrue in the hell realms, the lower realms, where we will, experience unbelievable suffering on the basis of these downfalls. So this whole section, again, this section B of this, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas practice equanimity, is just to help us to recognize that it's up to us, in spite of the presence of these beings in our world, to continue to uphold the vows and keep from generating downfalls. In Gyaltsab Je's commentary on page 10, he has one more of these kind of opponents, these imaginary opponents, and it says, one may think, or one may put forward, I will still be all right because they will rescue me later. So even if I don't, if I have my degeneration of my bodhisattva vows and behavior in this life, it's okay. They will come around to help me later. But as that verse said, if I continue to act recklessly, Gyaltsab Je says, I shall not become the object of their cure and will have to experience suffering continuously. I will have to take rebirth in the lower realms. And even if I take rebirth in the happy realms, I will have sickness and lack of freedom. Recall that our actions, when we engage in them, the negative actions, especially downfalls and what have you, they have potentially the result of a lower rebirth. But even when we get into the higher rebirths, we can still experience a variety of results from that. The results that are similar to the cause in terms of our experience. So we will have a deterioration of things in our lives, an inability to meet with the Dharma because we have blocked it in that life where we had these downfalls. So again, we have to be very attentive, even though the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are out there and they care deeply about us and all beings. We can't take for granted that they're going to be always there to rescue us, because it hasn't worked out yet in terms of karmically. We're still where we're at in samsara and being unenlightened, even though we've had many opportunities, no doubt, to meet with these beings and benefit from them. And now we move into the third outline. Recall again that this is 5 outlines in regard to this conscientiously abandoning faults, the first of the 3 conscientiousnesses around the trainings. The third outline speaks to the fact that the freedoms and endowments are rare. And this is a phrase that we use very frequently to refer to this precious human life, this perfect human existence that we have. And this is going to have 2 outlines. But before we get into the outlines, I wanted to hearken back to the very first chapter. You might all recall, if you were, have gone through that, if you studied that in October or subsequent to that, this very first chapter in the 4th verse, Master Shantideva refers to these leisures and endowments. He says, the leisures and endowments are very hard to find, since they accomplish the purposes of beings. If I do not accomplish benefit upon this, how will I acquire this in the future? This is kind of pointing to the fact that, at the very beginning of the text, Master Shantideva was saying, you're in a very opportune position. If you don't, take advantage of what you can do with this life to accomplish the purposes of all beings, if you don't achieve some benefit on the basis of this life, how will you get it in the future? We have to kind of take for granted that we've got this human existence. So I thought it would be worthwhile just to go through this. I didn't do this in the first course because we had so much to cover in that weekend, but to at least review these briefly. Most of you have studied the Lam Rim, the stages of the path, and know this topic, but this is how we describe a perfect human existence. First of all, the 8 freedoms or leisures. So we sometimes use the word freedom, sometimes leisure. There are the first 4 that are situations of, I missed the word free, being free from the non-human states that are not conducive to Dharma practice. The first is freedom from birth in the hell realms, then birth in the hungry ghost realms, in the animal realms, and then as a long life God. Well, all 4 of these existences, the first 3 are the 3 lower states, where we aren't having an existence that's generally conducive to Dharma practice because the suffering is so great there. The anger that exists in the hell realms, the out of control desire and craving that is in the hungry ghost realms, the ignorance that is in the animal realms, these block us from having a conducive life. The fourth one is a long life God, and it's described in a variety of ways, but it's essentially any of these higher existences where one gets such a subtle state of existence that one can't really use it in a really meaningful way. And sometimes even in these God states, there are huge pleasures so that one is often obstructed to even seeing the nature of existence as unsatisfactory and developing the mind of renunciation and so on. So any existence that is not conducive to Dharma, those that are generally spelled out, these four, we are free from that. We absolutely have that freedom in this human life. The last four are situations of being free from the restrictions to Dharma practice if we're reborn human. So we can be reborn human, but if we're born in a remote and irreligious land where the Dharma doesn't exist and isn't practiced, well, then we obviously won't meet with these teachings. We are also free from being born when the Buddha has not come. The Buddha, of course, appeared some 2,600 years ago, and we are still benefiting from his teachings. We can be grateful that we were born in this era, in this age. Um, Also, the seventh, freedom from being born mentally deficient. This also would include any other physical things that would impair our ability to learn, to develop the Dharma. We know it's not an absolute obstacle, but if we were born deaf, blind, mute, we would have some obstacles potentially to receiving and practicing the Dharma. Though, again, mentally deficient is the main one where we do have an impairment of our mental sense faculties. Then finally, freedom from holding wrong views. So freedom from holding wrong views, we may have to investigate individually because some of us come to the Dharma with stronger wrong views that we are in the process of getting rid of through learning the correct views of the Dharma and so on. But wrong views are generally the most serious wrong view that's held is the denial of the law of cause and effect, the denial of karma, because it leads to all sorts of repercussions. If we don't believe in karma, or I mean, I believe again is maybe not the best word. If you don't have a conviction in karma as the way in which experiences are determined, then you won't have any ability to uphold your behavior because it's irrelevant what you do because you don't have to face the consequences of that because karma doesn't exist. So that's the most serious wrong view. But again, we might have to investigate whether we are completely free from that. But no doubt most of us have, some movement away from the incorrect views that would get in the way of our being able to practice Dharma fully. So those are the 8 freedoms. The 10 endowments or opportunities, they're divided into 2 groups as well. There are first the 5 endowments, which are personal or internal. These are ones from your own side in the sense that you've created karmically. Karmically, you created the ability to be born as a human being in this life. That came from a prior act of morality as well as acts of generosity, prayers that you made to be born as this in this existence as a human. That's come into fruition. That's a wonderful endowment and opportunity. You're also endowed with being born in a central land. Central land is the words they use to refer to a place where the Dharma exists. Of course, if we look at the United States, I mean, the Dharma didn't exist in this country so strongly, even like 50 years ago, 60 years ago. So we can be very grateful that we're born in this land at this time where the Dharma is being propounded, where the beings are practicing it and so on. Being born with complete sense organs. Again, this is our mental sense faculties as well as our other faculties all being intact. Fourth, not having created what are called the 5 extreme negative karmas. These include taking the life of one's mother, the life of one's father, killing an arhat, a being who has attained that state of liberation from their own afflictions. The fourth one is kind of harming a Buddha with bad intent, drawing blood from a Buddha with an evil mind. And then the fifth one, creating a schism in the Sangha. They actually say that if you want to be technical, the last two can only be done during the time of the Buddha, because they're made specifically around the Buddha himself. And Devadatta, his cousin, is the one who actually engaged in two of those. Unfortunately, he harmed the Buddha, drew blood from the Buddha with malicious intent, and then he also created a schism in the monastic community there. And so we want to avoid anything that's even close to those ends. They're called sometimes immediate actions of retribution, because one is born in the worst state of the hell realms immediately after this life. You don't have another life in between. That karma ripens at the end of this life and propels you into that existence. So we haven't created those. Hopefully none of us have created those negative actions. The fifth is having faith in the objects being essentially the three baskets, the three collections of the Buddha's teachings, which include the Vinaya, which are the teachings on morality, the Sutra teachings, the Sutra basket, which are the teachings on concentration, and the Abhidharma, the manifest knowledge teachings on wisdom. So essentially the three higher trainings that are encapsulated in the basket of morality, concentration, and wisdom, we have some faith in those. And so again, this is something for each of us to investigate individually, but if we do have some level of faith in the Buddha's teachings, the baskets of the teachings of the Buddha, well, then we have a very opportune situation in this human existence based on all of these factors. The final five are endowments, which are circumstantial or external. And these have to do with kind of things going on in our world or in our era, our time, that we benefit from. So these aren't something you created the karma for from your own side in a really strict way, but obviously you did create the karma to be born when all of these things are going on. But these are more kind of these circumstantial or external situations. Being born first when the Buddha has appeared, being born when the Buddha has given Dharma teachings. They say that some Buddhas appear, but they don't give teachings of Dharma. They just appear and do whatever in the world, but never teach the Dharma. Being born when the Dharma remains. We're very blessed in that we have the whole corpus of the Buddha's teachings that are still in this world. And then the ninth, being born when there are Dharma followers, when there are beings who are dedicated to practicing the teachings in a very deep way. We can see that we all benefit from that in our organization as well as in the world at large. And then the 10th is being born when people have love for others, when they have a desire and willingness to support those engaging in virtue, in particular, those beings who are dedicated to the Buddhist path. So these are all things that, let me go stop the sharing for a moment. These are all factors that we can look at our own lives and say that we possess to some degree, hopefully to the greatest degree. By virtue of that, we are free from states where we couldn't use this life in a meaningful way, but moreover, we are also endowed with everything that we need to make this life most meaningful. These are really speaking to the situation that we find ourselves in that is important to acknowledge. It isn't easy to attain this. We should be so, like, I think Lama Zopa always talks about how we should be jumping up and down with joy every day of our lives because we have this. This was not an easy accomplishment. We might look at the world and think there are a lot of human beings on this planet, but how many of them have a precious human rebirth, a perfect human rebirth in the way we just described? How many of them are using their life in meritorious ways, in ways to accomplish this path? So it's very important to have, that kind of understanding of what all is entailed in having this perfect existence, but then to not take it for granted, to make sure that we do what we can to continue to have this. So if we look at this whole thing in terms of, there is a, let me go back to that outline. Let's get on this verse because this is going into Gyaltsab Je's commentary again then. So I think I have to go back up here a little bit, sorry. Okay, so we saw that this outline was called, this first outline of this third thing about the freedoms and endowments are rare. It said if bodhicitta degenerate, the free and endowment condition of the four wheels are defined. So it was interesting, the thing called the condition four wheels. When I took this previously, I found a source for this, and I didn't. I'm hoping that the internet's okay. If people are having difficulties, I apologize. I just got a message saying that the internet connection might not be that stable. But these four wheels, according to one text, and again, I don't remember what text I found this, are said to be four external conditions that are conducive to our development. The first is relying on beings, which again is a key part of our path, that we need to rely upon those beings who've developed some realizations and who can help us by giving us their guidance, their experience. The second is to abide in a harmonious environment. Most of us hopefully have residences as well as Dharma centers and other people that we can be involved in that creates a harmonious environment, an environment in which we have the ability to practice Dharma. The third is having supportive family and friends. The people who are in our lives, not just the environment, but also the people are very supportive in allowing us to continue to do what we do. And then the fourth sort of condition of collecting merit and making prayers, being able to use this life to accumulate the positive potential that we need and to make prayers to try to be a benefit to others. So again, these four Mahayana wheels, this is one interpretation of it. I wish I could, and I apologize that I didn't write down where I'd gotten that from. But these are what are spoken of in that outline heading. This one, that again, if our bodhicitta degenerates, then getting this perfect life with these freedoms and endowments, with those four conditions that we just talked about, is very difficult to find. Verse 15 goes into that. We'll do just a few more verses before we stop to see if there are questions. Verse 15 says, if the arising of a tathagata, faith, the attainment of a human body, and my being fit to cultivate virtue are rare, when will they be obtained again? So some of these are on our list, like faith in the three baskets, attaining a human body. This is also one of the endowments. Being fit to cultivate virtue means that we haven't engaged in the five actions of immediate retribution that would be quite harmful for us. The arising of a Buddha, we're in that era when a Buddha exists. These four are kind of they subsume all of the freedoms and endowments, all of those conditions. So if they are rare, if it's rare to get this, well then when will they be obtained again? So Gyaltsab says that one may think, well, I'll make an effort in engaging in, refraining from the downfalls and so on, when I attain the freedoms and endowments later on. In other words, I can just very easily say, well, if I can't practice it fully in this life, well, I'll get another human life. No big deal. I'll have all the conditions in place again, and I'll be able to practice the Dharma in that lifetime. So Gyaltsab says, if this is so rare, then to have attained a precious human rebirth where one trains in the two minds of bodhicitta is even rarer. So if it's rare even just to get all those conditions in place, well, now we have met with the Mahayana Dharma and want to practice these two levels of bodhicitta, aspiring and engaging. Well, that's even rarer to have all of that come together. So now we go into the second outline within this idea topic of the freedoms and endowments are rare. And this is, although attaining one, if we do get, a human rebirth and have it, with all these conditions, since it disintegrates quickly, just as this life does, make an effort. We have to make the effort now. So if we go to verse 16, there are actually two verses just one verse, verse 16 for this. Shantideva says, today I am free from sickness, fed and free from harm. But life is momentary and deceptive. The body is like an object on loan, but for a short time. So this translation is a little bit different than what you have in your written one that you have. And why I'm doing that, there's two explanations of this. In the one that you have in front of you, perhaps, again, if you do have the root text, it says, I am free from sickness like the day. And whether it's today I am free from sickness or I am free from sickness like the day, it's the same sort of meaning. The idea is that we are at this moment kind of free from the states that would make this human existence really difficult for us to practice. Today is a day when, most of us here, hopefully, have what we need. We don't have any obstructing conditions to our being here and engaging in these teachings, engaging in the Dharma. And so one may think, as Gyaltsab says, this body I currently attained has no obstructing conditions against it and is endowed with conducive conditions. Therefore, I'm going to practice later. We might have that thought too, right? Well, now I'm healthy and everything's going fine. I can just continue to do this, and eventually I'll find time in my life to engage in the Dharma, to abandon any downfalls, what have you. So continuing on page 12 of Gyaltsab Je's commentary, he says, in answer to that objection that somebody might raise, that one should not act as if one has leisure. A human body without the obstructing condition of sickness is like a day in the context of saying a day like this. But a day like this without sickness, without the obstructing conditions of harm, and without the conducive conditions of food and so forth, is deceptive. Life does not abide even for one moment and disintegrates quickly. This body is only a one-time loan, and one has no power over it. Therefore, do not act as if there is time and make an effort. So he's kind of bringing in teachings that we actually did see this a little bit in the confession section of the second chapter when we studied that in the first course, was the idea that this life is fleeting, is transitory. We may think, okay, today's good. I'm healthy. I have food. I have everything that I need, all the conducive conditions. Well, it's going to continue. Well, do you have a guarantee that it's going to continue? So far we've been right in that every day we've gone to bed and thought, well, we're going to have another day in this life, and we've had it. But there will be a day when we won't have that, when this will come to an end. So we have to make an effort now. We have to be sure to be very conscientious now. We can't sort of let it all fall on another day, another time that we may or may not have. If we have it, wonderful. But if we don't, well, then we will regret the fact that we didn't use this day well. So this takes us then into the fourth outline of this whole section that has to do with how we abandon the faults, the downfalls. Master Shantideva's advice to help us to do that. This is called, if reborn in the lower realms, if we do have the misfortune of going to the lower realms after this life, if we've had those downfalls and we haven't really done a good job of upholding this behavior, well then we won't have an opportunity to generate virtue in those states. Look at how hard it is to practice virtue in this human life, to kind of go against the grain of much around us in the world. This is going to have the outlines, getting them all on this. I'll list them individually. There is no opportunity for virtue in the lower realms. This is verse 17. With such behavior of mine, I will not obtain even a human body. If this human form is not attained, there will be solely negativity and no virtue. So as much as we can, put all various reasons forward, it's unsuitable to think that we somehow will have a succession of precious human rebirths so we can practice in another life or what have you. We have to recognize that through the force of our delusion, if we attain a lower rebirth, we're going to end up not getting more human rebirths. We'll just continue to create the causes for more lower rebirths. There will be solely negativity in those states and no virtue. We look at the animal realm. There might be those rare cases of some animals, dogs who help people who as service animals or what have you. Even some beings rarely, do show some compassion for other species and that. But in general, the life of animals in this world is not a very virtuous one. Most of them are engaged in killing, taking the lives of other beings, and so on. So as Gyaltsab Je says on page 12, if I take rebirth in the lower realms, I will only generate non-virtue and not the slightest amount of virtue, and it will be difficult to be reborn again in the happy realms. So it's not proper for us to think that we're somehow going to have this succession of human lives or even possibly return to another human life that quickly if we degenerate to the lower realms. Second outline, this fourth outline, under the abandoning faults, is if one does not strive while in the happy realms, which we're in right now, one will be confused in the lower realms concerning what is to be practiced and abandoned. What we do in this life has a great bearing on what we do in the future. So if we don't practice virtue now, how will we carry forward that knowledge of what we have to abandon, what we have to adopt? So Master Shantideva says, if even when I have the good fortune of virtuous conduct, I do not create virtue, then what shall I do when all confused by the suffering of the unfortunate realms? In other words, if we don't create that strength of habit now, in this life while we have the opportunity to practice virtue, well then what are we going to do when we become an animal or a hungry ghost and we're confused by the suffering that we have to experience in those realms? So, to conclude that section on page 13, Gyaltsab Je says, hence, I need to make an effort now to achieve again a precious human rebirth. So this fourth outline has one more outline. The third outline, it's extremely difficult to be liberated from the lower realms because of some of the reasons we've already talked about, but let's go on to that verse. Verse 19, he says, if I do not create virtues but readily amass negativities, then for hundreds of millions of eons I shall not even hear the term good migration. So if this is what we do, if we don't create virtues to get into a good rebirth and we end up in an unfortunate one, well then in that lower rebirth, if we aren't familiar with virtue, we're only going to create non-virtue. We're only going to mass negativities. And for many, many eons, we will be stuck in the lower realms. Of course, it's not forever. Nothing is forever in regard to these samsaric states, but it's as if we would be there for such a long duration of time because it will take a lot of time for causes and conditions to come together to get us out of that state, to end an unfortunate rebirth in the lower realms and transmigrate into a fortunate state, a state like what we have right now. You know, we have been in those lower realms many, many times, but we have the good fortune of having ascended from that in this life. Let's go to the final outline and we'll conclude and see if there are some questions. Oops, sorry. I don't know what happened there. My cursor control. The fifth outline of around abandoning faults, the final one, is why it is difficult to find freedom and endowments. We might recollect our teachings that we've had in regard to the Lam Rim teachings on perfect human rebirth. Master Shantideva says, for this very reason, for everything that we've just looked at, the Bhagawan said that just as in the case of a turtle inserting its neck into a yoke adrift upon the vast ocean, it is very hard to attain the human state. So as I said, this is a story or a little tale that's told in the Lam Rim and the stages of the path to give us that appreciation for this human rebirth in terms of how rare, how difficult it is to find. And the analogy is not just a turtle, but it's actually said to be a blind turtle. The blind turtle is living on the bottom of the ocean, and it only comes up, and imagine this entire world covered with ocean. So that's the first thing, is that you're dealing with a lot of ocean. The blind turtle's at the bottom of the ocean, and it only comes up once every 100 years. On the surface of the ocean, there's a golden yoke, a ring that is floating. And for the turtle to put its head through the ring to actually achieve that, even though the turtle's blind and only comes up once every 100 years, that's said to be how rare it is to get this perfect human rebirth. Now, whether this, I don't know what the statistics would even be on something like this, but obviously it's trying to point out the fact that we need to be very kind of treasure this life, not in any way demean its importance or our ability to attain it again. Certainly put our effort into achieving what we can in terms of a good human existence for our next life, but not take it for granted. You know, we have it right now, and only through the force of the causes and conditions we've created in the past. So Master Shantideva is kind of ending this section by referring to that rarity, that difficulty in finding this precious human rebirth. So that takes us up through verse 20 and through the conclusion of the first of the three conscientiousnesses in regard to the trainings. And this is the first one around abandoning faults, abandoning any of the misdeeds that would impair our ability to continue on this path. I mean, the sad reality, maybe it's just what it is, and reality, not necessarily sad, is, as many of my teachers have said, that in order to attain enlightenment for most of us, it's going to take a continuity of perfect human rebirths. We're going to have to do this over many lifetimes. Yes, in the tantric teachings, it said that if you are able to line everything up in a single lifetime, have all the causes and conditions in place, and practice highest yoga tantra, you can achieve enlightenment in this lifetime in 3 years and 3 months. I mean, a very small period of this life. But for most of us, this may not be a possibility. But nonetheless, we can absolutely create the causes for a good rebirth, to continue on this path. And when we have the motivation of bodhicitta, we have the potential to do that. But this first section was saying, yes, don't engage then in the faults and the misbehaviors that are going to go in the opposite direction, where we're not going to end up with a good rebirth at the end of this life. And we may get separated from our teachers and from bodhicitta and the Mahayana teachings for eons if that happens, because we'll only continue to circle in those lower realms. So if there are any questions, you can certainly unmute your mic and come to the screen and say a question. You're welcome to do that. If you want to put a question in the chat box, you can do that. And if there are no questions, then I'll go on for a little bit longer, for another 10 minutes or so. Any questions at this juncture? Okay, well, if you do have questions later, again, feel free to pass them along to me, and I'll be happy to bring them into the next session. So again, that was the first of the 3 areas of trainings. Oh, I'm sorry, we do. Oh, the reference for the 4 Mahayana wheels. Great, thank you. So it was from FPMT, and I assume, Richard, that those are the same. Thank you for sharing that. I assume that that's the same as what I had said. Yes? Anyway.
Yes, yes it is.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Richard. Yeah, sometimes I forget to write down the source of these things, so I appreciate that. I may just go ahead and click on that so it goes and saves to my screen so that I don't lose it. And then I can forward that on to others if you're interested in taking a look at that. So now we're moving into the other side of it. Again, we looked at abandoning the misdeeds, the faults, the downfalls. Now we're looking at how do we uphold virtue. And again, these are very correlated. As you know from your study of karma, we talk about like the 10 non-virtues and how the actions that are opposite to them are the 10 virtues. So when we have the act of killing, for example, as a non-virtue, then the act of refraining from killing becomes the virtuous side of that. So they're very much tied to each other, but nonetheless, they do have a separate impetus and you know, um, uh, emphasis being placed on them in regard to these 2 aspects of our trainings. So let's go on then back to the slides for just a little bit, and we'll do a few more before we conclude tonight. So let's go on then to the next outline. As I said, conscientiously meditating on virtue. This has 3 outlines, which again, because of the length of the outlines, I'm going to put them on one at a time. The first outline that Gyaltsab Je has is on page 15 of the commentary, if you have it in front of you. It says, "It is appropriate to strive in abandoning the infinite non-virtue accumulated previously." In other words, it's appropriate to move in that more positive direction of accumulating virtue and not accumulating the deeds. Master Shantideva says in verse 21, "If even by the negativity committed for an instant, one will abide in relentless torment for eons, then because of the negativities I have accumulated in beginningless psychic existence, what need to mention my not going to a good migration?" So this is kind of getting us us into this topic of practicing virtue. And it's the recognition that even if we commit a negativity for an instant, some acts of killing a being only take a second, a very slight amount of time. If you kill a mosquito, my gosh, it doesn't take long at all, right? Or an ant. By virtue of that act of taking the life intentionally of a being, you could abide in relentless torment, which is the worst of the hell realms, for eons. Then, because of the negativities that we've accumulated in psychic existence from beginningless time, what need us mention are not into a good migration. In other words, we have this force that we're bringing into this life and carrying through this life to go into their next life of having committed a lot of negativity. Well, that means we have to work really hard to move in the opposite direction. We have to do a lot to create more virtuous actions so that at the end of this life, we won't be under the control of those negative karmas and we'll actually be able to experience the fruits of the good deeds that we've done. So the next Oh, I wanted to point this out. This is in your commentary. How you do oppose some of those non-virtuous negative actions you've done in the past is by purifying negativity by way of the four powers. Gyaltsab Je mentions this. And there is a little footnote to that that you could go to, but I went ahead and repeated these here. We talked about them in the confession chapter 2 in the first course. So I'm just going to review them very briefly. That may be all I have time for tonight, but we use the four R's as a way of remembering these very easily. The first is regret, to bring to mind those things that we can recollect in terms of behavior we've engaged in that is negative, such as killing those mosquitoes, under the force of our ignorance previously in this life, such as the killing we must have done in other lifetimes under the control of our ignorance and so on. We can make that regret even for actions that we don't recall having done by having that general sense of regret for any of the non-virtues. Then on the basis of that, we have reliance, which includes the minds of refuge and bodhichitta, much like what we recited at the beginning of class tonight, renewing our faith in the three jewels as a support for this purification, and then generating the mind of bodhichitta, the intention to benefit all beings, which helps us to repair the relationship that we've damaged with other beings as well. So this is a way of reestablishing a solid ground, a support for our purification. The next step is remedy, and remedy can include any positive action. The most common remedies are the Vajrasattva mantra recitation with the visualizations, prostrations to the 35 Buddhas, and so on. But you can also recite sutras. You can meditate on compassion, loving kindness. There are any virtuous action you do that you are using as a remedy to kind of offset the power of those negative deeds that you're regretting. You engage in something. It creates kind of, again, that virtuous action that blocks those non-virtues from ripening. Then the final one is very important. They actually say this is the most important, is to have some resolve to refrain from those actions in the future. And that can be done in terms of saying, I won't do that action again, if you can make that commitment. But it will also include saying, I won't do that action for some period of time for those actions that we find harder to refrain from. But this is, again, just one way that we can begin to lessen the effect of the negative actions that we have done. So that verse that was telling us, again, if we look at the previous verse here, that we have committed all this negativity in the past that will propel us potentially into an unfortunate state. We have to be concerned about that, not just have the impetus to practice virtue, but also to purify the negativities that we must have done in the past. So let's see. Let's go ahead and leave off there then. We'll conclude with verse 21 tonight. So one quick question here. Does Tantra also have grounds and paths, or does this apply to Sutra? Absolutely, Tantra has grounds and paths. There's a book by Daniel Kotzart called Highest Yoga Tantra that has a little chart that delineates where the various paths intersect with the tantric realizations and so on. And so you have a very similar progression. Tantra obviously has slightly different techniques, but it's still a realization of emptiness, though it's together with the techniques that are taught in Highest Yoga Tantra. So absolutely, yeah, paths and grounds also exist for Tantra as well as Sutra. Any other questions or comments before we conclude?
Don, who wrote the book?
It's Daniel Kotzart, Kozort. And those of you who have Highest Yoga Tantra Empowerment, it's a really nice book to read to give you an overview. It talks about not just the more general ways, but also even Kala Chakra. There's a whole chapter on Kala Chakra in there. It's not a very large book, but yeah, it's useful to look into the generation stage and the completion stage of Highest Yoga Tantra and line things up with the sutra understanding of where you progress on the path. Just so you know, in fact, it's said that the practice of Sutra will only get you so far, that Tantra needs to be practiced at some juncture, simply because Sutra doesn't have the ability to remove all of the obscurations. And that's because Tantra allows you to access the clear light mind. And the clear light mind will then allow you, because it's a non-conceptual mind, to a very subtle mind, to remove all of the obscurations that are connected to any of our conceptual minds. It's also said that Tantra more effectively creates the causes for the form bodies of a Buddha, whereas in Sutra, it's said that it accumulates through just the force of merit. Well, how does that happen? In Tantra, we actually use the techniques to work with our subtle winds in the body to create the form bodies of a Buddha. So there are a couple of reasons why you have to practice Tantra in order to achieve complete enlightenment. But don't let that discourage anyone who's only on the sutra path now. Just practice sutra as best as you can. And when you feel it's an appropriate time, and maybe under the guidance of your guru, then it's important to enter into the tantric path, and specifically highest yoga tantra. So, great question. Okay, good. So let's go ahead and go back to the prayers. Again, you should have your prayer book there, and we'll be on page 3, I believe. Let me get mine up on my screen here if I can do that. Oh, I'm sorry, way back to page 5. That's right, we had the Heart Sutra in there. Page 5, the recitations after the teachings. Let's do these first 2 prayers just in English. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhichitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Then on page 6, we have 2 long life prayers, one for His Holiness, which is the new prayer that Rinpoche is advising that we do, that he's provided to us to do. And then the second prayer that is for Lama Zopa as well. As we recite these 2 prayers for these 2 teachers, you might think of other teachers that you have a karmic connection with, as well as all the guides in this world, whatever tradition they are from, and make that strong prayer that they continue to abide in this world with good health, long lives, and that we and others always have perfect guides in all our lives. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso I beseech. May all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the 3 jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then finally, I ask you to dedicate, to kind of be generous with the merit that you've created, to give it to beings whose condition, whose situation moves you right now. This is an important part of our practice because we have some karmic connection to those beings, people that we know who are experiencing obstacles or illness. Maybe we even know those who are dying or who have died recently. And we might even have parts of the world where we have a heart connection to what's going on, areas of strife due to the elements or what have you. Kind of think about those beings who you want to benefit from this practice tonight and send this positive energy out to them. Think that it becomes the cause to relieve their suffering immediately and for them to find all the causes and conditions that will lead to perfect happiness. And may all beings find true peace and happiness through what we've done here tonight. Okay, so thank you all very much. And again, keep in mind that these teachings will be posted fairly shortly after on YouTube, so you can watch them again, or if you miss one, again, just get in touch with your coordinator and they'll be sure to get you all the information of how to access those. Okay, so thank you all very much and have a good week.
Thank you, Don.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Jennifer. Okay, bye-bye, everyone.